Well, to me, it was the most unusual thing that would never happen in another million years, because never would they allow one person, well, I was a teenager, to fly a bomber.
It was a very odd setup, a typical British one of, well, here's a crisis, let's see what we can do about it.
You know, it's amazing what you can do when you're young, isn't it?
During the Second World War, the challenge of moving ever-increasing numbers of fighting aircraft from the factories to the squadrons of the RAF fell to the men and women pilots of the Air Transport Auxillary, or A.T.A. Famed for ferrying anything to anywhere, the work of the A.T.A. represents a unique episode in the history of aviation. From teenage novices to First World War veterans, the A.T.A. attracted an extraordinary collection of flying enthusiasts from across the free world. These were the unsung heroes and heroines of the skies, the forgotten pilots of the Second World War. It may be more than 60 years since many of these A.T.A. veterans last climbed into the cockpit of a Spitfire, Lancaster or Hurricane, but time has not dimmed their enthusiasm for taking to the skies.
Absolutely. I did.
Each year, the RAF lay on this special memorial flight from RAF Lynham in recognition of the vital role these pilots played in supporting their service during the Second World War.
I don't think I understand all that lot, but that lot's very nice.
It's more your cup of tea.
Yeah.
A.T.A. pilots clocked up an astounding 742,000 flying hours, undertaking more than 308,000 ferrying missions, and between them they mastered the controls of up to 147 different types of aircraft. Each pilot kept a tally of his or her personal total.
How many aircraft was it that you'd flown?
260 Spitfires.
260 Spitfires by the age of 22, and learned to fly at the age of 18, and learned to fly 6 aircraft in the space of a year. I mean, that just wouldn't happen these days. Fantastic. And they've obviously opened the doors for female pilots, you know, throughout, which is brilliant. I think it's great.
So how did young women like Diana and Maggie come to be flying the most powerful fighting aircraft of the day? The origins of the A.T.A. can be traced back to the heady days of pre-war flying, when all you needed was a flat field and a fine day to take to the skies.
Well, the great thing about flying in the 30s was that there were no regulations at all. At least I didn't know of any. And we just, if we wanted to fly somewhere, we'd get out a map and fly somewhere.
It was marvellous, really. You just hired an aeroplane if you hadn't got one, and off you went. I don't remember ever telling anybody where you were going or when you were coming back. You know, nobody bothered.
Away from the fun and frivolity of club flying, the recognition that Germany was rearming prompted one flying enthusiast, Gerard Delange, to consider how civilian pilots like himself, who didn't qualify for the RAF on age or medical grounds, might be used to support the war effort. He suggested that a fleet of light aircraft, piloted by civilians, could be used for a variety of tasks, including transporting mail, injured soldiers and VIPs. Delange was the director of British Airways, and through his connections in government, he was given the job of bringing together the most experienced civilian pilots of the day. In September 1939, the Air Transport Auxillary was born.
They started off in Bristol with a nucleus of 30 British Overseas Airways pilots and the A.T.A. old people, the over 25s.
I was a young chap, about 27 or 28, something like that, and you had to say, what am I going to do? And I obviously wanted to fly if at all possible. I quickly found out there wasn't a hope with the RAF. I wore glasses, and that ruled it out. I learnt about the existence of A.T.A. It must have been the summer of 39.
Peter offered his services and was invited for a test flight at Whitchurch Aerodrome on the outskirts of Bristol. At the time, Whitchurch had become the wartime base of British Airways operations, so it seemed a logical place for Delanger to set up the A.T.A.
My wife and I just drove down and reported. I was given a 10-minute flight by Macmillan, who was the test pilot for A.T.A. And I was told that I would do.
On the 3rd of September, the day war was declared, the A.T.A. began operations. The private pilots who assembled were a mixed bunch. They included farmers, doctors, bank managers and publicans, alongside seasoned First World War fighter pilots who had honed their skills performing dogfights in canvas biplanes. Journalist Keith Jopp wore the scars of these encounters.
Keith Jopp was a real oddity because he had only one eye, only one arm, and he had certain other masculine shortages as well. But he was always cheerful, always determined to get his hand on any aeroplane he could, and he made it work.
Such was the volume of work that the A.T.A. needed all the qualified pilots it could get, so Jopp wasn't the only pilot in its ranks with disabilities.
I was a very young cadet, heard a row going on in the common room, and I peeped round the door. And there were these two one-arm pilots waving their respective arm about, having a tremendous set to about which arm it was better to have to be able to fly, or not to have to be able to fly.
In the early days, I'm quite sure that we were looked upon as very odd fish indeed, and I'm sure the RAF were very alarmed at their lovely aeroplanes being put in the hands of these wild amateurs who really didn't know what to do.
Initially conceived as an aerial communications service, the A.T.A.'s mission soon changed to one of ferrying service aircraft to frontline squadrons, a job previously done by the RAF. The only problem was the limited numbers of qualified pilots. Most male pilots with the requisite 250 flying hours had already been approached, and so it was decided to open up the A.T.A. to women, due largely to the campaigning of veteran pilot Pauline Gower. But the move sparked much controversy.
Well, I suppose today you wouldn't understand it, because women are doing the same thing as men all round. But in those days you didn't. I mean, women, delicate creatures, you know, you've got to be looked after. And the idea of them being an equal of men as flying was a bit revolutionary. The diehards at the Air Ministry and the politicians took a bit of convincing, I think.
But they weren't the only ones who needed convincing.
Everyone was trying to say, you can't do it, you know, women are no good, you must be kept at the kitchen sink. And Charles Gray wrote in the airplane, women should be kept at the kitchen sink, you know, having babies.
And he wrote a letter to his paper saying, you know, it's too stupid of women to think they can go and fly bombers when they don't even know how to scrub a floor properly or make their husband's dinner, you know, that sort of attitude. And so there we are. I mean, husbands can look after themselves sometimes, can't they?
These women are in the news at home because they've undertaken a somewhat unusual war job, and their work is to ferry new aircraft of the Royal Air Force from factory to aerodrome.
Well, the first 8 who came in were exceptional women, and they'd done a lot of flying by those days, you know, many hundreds of hours.
They included a skiing instructor, an international ice hockey player and a ballet dancer. Several were mothers, and one was a grandmother. This was the first time in history that women would be officially employed to ferry military aircraft, and their appointment, not surprisingly, attracted a lot of media attention.
They were all society beauties, a lot of them, and really beautiful they were too. They used to call them the powder puff or something, and they hated it because they're not like that, you know.
At 20, Jackie Moggridge was the youngest pilot to enter the A.T.A, and her youthful looks sometimes caused problems.
I'm told I looked about 12. I didn't think so, but, you know, everyone else did. And I went to pick up a mosquito and with my little chit. And the engineering officer was about 6'4", and he came up to me and he said, "Are you supposed to be the pilot taking my aircraft that I've been working on for 2 weeks? I'm not having any schoolgirl fly that aircraft," he said. "It's only made of wood. You'll smash it the first." So I said, "Excuse me, this is my permission." And I showed him my permission. He wouldn't believe me. He had to ring up Home Command. I made him ring up Home Command and get the clear, you know.
The first women pilots were based at Hatfield Aerodrome, just north of London, but their preparations for ferrying were rudimentary, to say the least.
In 1940, we had no training. We had to pass an exam at Bristol on the Tiger Moth. We were sent there to do one circuit.
The new women pilots were initially tasked with the unenviable job of delivering Tiger Moths to RAF training bases in Scotland. To rekindle memories of those gruelling flights, Lettice joined Tiger Moth pilot Bob Gibson for a look at his vintage aircraft.
Very clear in my mind.
Does it bring back memories looking inside?
I remember it.
I must admit, I still have trouble working out how to use that compass.
Oh, lovely. I adored those compasses.
And navigating cross-country in an open cockpit when you're used to a modern aeroplane is really quite different.
It's all so different, isn't it?
Quite different.
Oh, absolutely different. Now everybody has GPSs and things.
Can you remember the first time that you flew a Tiger Moth, and have you got any particular memories of flying the aeroplane?
One of the standard jobs was to take one from Hatfield to, I think, Lossiemouth, mostly. And that took about at least two or three stops.
Did you plan in advance where you were going to land, or was it a matter of
well,
seeing how far you got?
Well, you decided. There was nobody to plan for. I mean, you planned it yourself.
Right.
And
did you have to let them know you were coming?
You couldn't.
Or you just
there was
turned
no means.
up?
There was no means, no.
Yeah.
Not in those days.
And sometimes it used to take more than a day to get there.
Oh, gosh, always. You'd never get to Lossiemouth in one day.
Well, in winter it was very, very cold. I remember I had a leather mask made for my face, which sort of helped to keep the cold out a bit. And we used to take them up to Lossiemouth and Kinloss, and then come back by train, usually.
And one of the trips we did, there were 5 of us taking Tiger Moths all the way from the south, all the way up to Prestwick at, 70 miles an hour. That's a long way, and you had to land several times to refuel. And they told me, now, we haven't got enough maps, we've got one map, and the leader will have that map.
I used to sort of call it a gaggle, like a gaggle of geese, I suppose. And we did, which was horrible, really, because you never really wanted to do what everybody else did. We used to go up far, Carlisle, and then fly up the Nith Valley to Prestwick.
A good view was vital for A.T.A. pilots. With no radio communications and sometimes no map, one of the greatest challenges was simply finding your way around the country. Flying below the clouds, within sight of the ground, the pilots built up a mental image of the countryside, looking for landmarks as signposts en route.
There was no radios in our aeroplanes, and if there was, it wasn't sort of fitted up. So one just had to literally draw a line on your map and then fly on the regular, on the course on it, and just hope that the railway lines came up at the right time in the right place, which they didn't always, of course, and that was awkward.
And you had to literally follow roads or railways more often, look out for rivers and know whereabouts where they joined up there would be an airport you'd get to. So it really was an entirely personal hedge-hopping operation.
I think flying with the doors down makes it more drafty.
But we thought we'd give you a better view.
A better view, yes, that's right.